Okay, let's concentrate on Bret Hart against the reigning champion, Nick Bockwinkel, 4 years champion, as Stu Hart, local promoter, as mentioned. And prior to that, 6 years, considered to be the #1 challenger. I was saying a moment ago there was nobody in Bockwinkel's corner. J.R. Foley has suddenly come upon the scene. Thus far, I see no black armband, but he's not too happy. Bret Hart, Nick Bockwinkel. Bret Hart turned 25 just the other day, a week ago to be precise. Bockwinkel, oh, did he catch? He caught those feet in the jaw. Some excellent work being done here in the opening few moments as we near the 5-minute mark.
And away we go with another edition of the Stampede Wrestling Show.
Let me tell you good people something, and you beer belly sharecroppers out there.
Well, he takes me to the movies, we go strolling in the park, watch the late show on TV, he holds my hand in the dark, he's a ring-a-ding-dong dandy. He's a ring-a-ding-dong dandy.
Just a minute, what's going on
He
here?
always buys me fancy candy, he's a ring-a-ding-dong dandy, and he's mine.
We're going to have a little knocking. Well, hi, everybody. As the old saying goes, batten down the hatches and lock the door. It is indeed wrestling time once more.
Hello again, wrestling fans. This is the Ring-a-Ding-Dong Dandy podcast here yet again. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about a different kind of aspect of Stampede Wrestling, the superfan. The fan who loved Stampede Wrestling from a very early age, followed it through, watched it through its demise in the late 80s, may have followed it through the late 90s, but nonetheless, they were a superfan. They were dedicated to Stampede Wrestling. We're going to find out what made them a superfan, what brought them to Stampede Wrestling, what brought them to pro wrestling in general. What made you a fan? What drew you to Stampede Wrestling or the Territory Days, or just in wrestling in general? Many of us have one particular match or one particular memory of something that brought us to wrestling. For some of us, it was attending that first match with their father, our grandfather, our grandmother. For others, it was seeing that first match on television. And then for others, it was a particular incident. Maybe it was a heel turn. Maybe it was a dastardly deed that took place. Maybe it was a face winning a major title. Perhaps for some of you, there wasn't one particular incident that occurred or one particular memory that led to becoming a pro wrestling fan. But for many of us, there was that one specific time. And for me, it was seeing my first episode of Stampede Wrestling at the age of 12 on TV. And at that time, who did I see? I saw Bret Hart, bloodied and beaten, taking on Nick Bockwinkel. At the time, it was a great scientific match. It was a match for the AWA World Heavyweight title. And I didn't really know about pro wrestling at the time. I was a baseball fan. I loved football. But pro wrestling was something that I'd never been exposed to until that time. I didn't have a parent that watched it avidly. I didn't have local wrestling that somebody took me to. But seeing Bret and Bockwinkel in the ring, making magic, did it for me right away. And from that point forward, I was watching wrestling on a weekly basis in my territory, Stampede Wrestling. It wasn't until I was a little bit older I was able to attend some of the matches. And for myself, that was in the Regina Auditorium. And I saw some of the Harts, but some other wrestlers as well. But my main memory of when wrestling actually hit a point in my brain where it becomes engraved was that Bret and Bockwinkel match that you heard at the start of the podcast. I'm going to play a little bit more of it here, and then we're going to hear from two superfans, Kukuk and Dwayne Soper. and they're going to tell us about their memories of becoming wrestling fans, in particular of Stampede Wrestling, what drew them to wrestling, what they remember from over the years, and how they've kept on top of their wrestling interests over the years since that time.
Be sure to follow the Dynasty Wrestling Podcast Network and all of the participating podcasts on social media. The easiest way to find us is on Twitter. You can follow the network at WrestlePods, and you can find all the individual shows at their Twitter accounts. You can find the Wrestling Nostalgia Show at Wrestle Nostalgia, the Ring a Ding Dong Dandy Podcast at Stampede Pod, and the Wild Men Podcast at Wild Men Podcast. Also search us on Facebook for pages and groups. Participate, interact, join the network, and be a fan. Thank you for your support.
Nick Bockwinkel at or near the top of the ladder for the last decade. Off those ropes now. Whoops. Here comes a slam. Bret Hart doing the job. Yes, indeed he is. One fall, 1 hour. The challenger, Bret Hart of Calgary. The champion, Nick Bockwinkel, Beverly Hills, California. Hart jammed into that corner, the tots. Head scissors by Bockwinkel.
Support all of the podcasts here on the Dynasty Wrestling Podcast Network. The best way to do that is go to our Pro Wrestling Tees store. It is at ProWrestlingTees.com/TheDaveDynasty. There you will find all of the shirts that we offer. I Heart Old School Wrestling, Bruiser Buddy, the Podcast Mask shirt, and of course, the official shirts for the Ontario Wildmen and the Ring a Ding Dong Dandy podcast. Visit ProWrestlingTees.com/TheDaveDynasty, order a shirt, and support the network. If you would also like to support, you can join our Patreon. It's at Patreon.com/DaveDynasty. There you will get exclusive audio and video clips, early releases on podcasts, and much, much more. And if you would just like to make one-time contributions to support us, you can go to paypal.me/TheDaveDynasty. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for listening. Continue to support independent wrestling podcasts.
Welcome, Stampede Wrestling fans, to another edition of the Ring a Ding Dong Dandy podcast. Today we've got two super fans with us. This is going to be a fun time. We've got Roy from Calgary. We've got Dwayne from Medicine Hat. How are you both doing today, guys?
Doing good. Yourself?
Excellent.
Great,
we're out here in
you.
BC. How's the weather in Alberta right now?
Hot.
Yeah, it's nice today.
Is it smoky out there?
Off and on. I mean, I was up in Edmonton actually for last week, and it was nice and clear up there. But here I come back to a big smog-filled place. I don't know what Medhead's like.
Yeah, we had it last week quite a bit, and the rain hit about Thursday and cleared up for us.
Yeah, we've had a few days here where it was really smoky. Now it's just kind of clouded over and cool. So both of you are absolutely two of the biggest Stampede Wrestling fans around, of course, and both of you got different histories of how you came to be a fan from what I understand. But I'm going to let both of you take your story and tell me all about it. So starting with you, Roy, you were in Calgary at the time when you first started to learn about Stampede Wrestling and start taking in the events. Can you tell me how you actually went to your first event? Did you go with family or friends to that first event?
Yeah, I started watching. It was probably like in '79 or something like that. And I was actually talking to Dwayne a bit about this prior. And then my sister, because I'd watch it all the time. Like I'd sneak into the rooms to use their TV to watch it. And then she finally decided in '82, well, I'm going to take him to the show with me. And her then soon-to-be husband, in June of '82, and yeah, that was quite the event for a 12-year-old kid to see live. You know, just the ring was smaller. That was the first thing I noticed, of course, right, when you come to a live event. And it was fantastic because it was like real-life characters that you can actually finally see, not just on TV and stuff. So it was amazing. First time to see the Dynamite Kid, which was, man, high tempo or what. And he was wrestling Keith Hart, which was just an all-out war for about 10 minutes. And one thing that always stuck out for my first card, though, was the entrance of Duke Myers. That you didn't realize how big of a man he was until you actually saw him live. And he'd come out to, I think it was called the Duke of Earl, that song. And he just, like, towered over everybody coming out of the dressing room to face Leo Burke for the North American title. And it was just something you don't really forget at all. It was just, it was amazing. Also getting to see Gene Kiniski for his first and one of his only last times, I think, in Calgary. That was really cool. You know, getting to see him against, I believe it was Ho Chi Lao. So it was a lot of fun. It was overwhelming almost as a kid. You know, it was just something I'd be waiting to see for a long time.
Duke Myers was often an underappreciated guy in Stampede Wrestling. He didn't get a lot of attention outside of Stampede Wrestling, but he certainly had a big presence about him. He was always a stand-up professional guy.
Yeah, I thought so too, and I think he knew how to drew. That's why Stu put belts on him, and I think Stu trusted him a lot. He gave him a young Kerry Brown, and I mean, they made one of the best tag teams ever, and I think in Stampede history by far. And they carried the belts. I don't know. Dwayne might know about 3 or 4 times at least. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it was like he was just a solid hand, right, wherever he worked. And Calgary was his mainstay, at least late in his career, anyways.
Yeah, Masters of Disaster, in terms of overall Stampede Wrestling tag teams, they're certainly up there with Bad Company, right?
Oh,
yeah,
by far.
I put them above Bad Company personally, myself, by far, too. I think they compete up there with the Viet Cong Express, which I know is a personal favorite of Dwayne's.
Yep.
And, you know, there's a couple other teams like Leo Burke and Hubert Gland. I don't think they ever got the title put on them, but they would be tag teams for years throughout Stampede. And I don't ever recall them having the belts put on them, which I found really weird.
So, Dwayne, how about you? I understand that you moved from Newfoundland out west to Alberta when you were quite young?
Yeah, I got to become a fan in the mid to late 70s in Newfoundland with Superstars Wrestling. Then we had a brief stay to see some Tom Cole's guys in Kitimat, and then we had a brief stay in Edmonton. And I can't honestly remember the first show by chance, but of course watching the TV in Edmonton nonstop every Saturday was a highlight. And then when we moved to Medicine Hat, it was I think probably the first live show that I saw was Bulldogs versus Myers, and shoot, I can't remember offhand who his partner was, but it was a cage match. Oh, Bad News! I can't believe I forgot that. It was Bad News and Myers. They were in a cage match with the Bulldogs, and it was quite an affair there. Bulldogs were just on the verge of becoming big in Japan and then heading to the WWF. So they were way above everybody else in skill set. And then it just took off from there. They had the brief stay where Stu shut down for a bit, but then 86 to 88, Stampede was here in Medicine Hat probably at least once every month and a half. And then I used to travel around to Tabor, Bow Island, Swift Current as well, and catch a lot of the shows there because they were only within 40 minutes, an hour. So sometimes we'd get 2-3 shows a week. We were pretty spoiled that way.
What did you find was the biggest difference between Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling and George Cannon's Superstars of Wrestling?
Well, Cannon's was more Ontario-based guys coming in, and it was more just pound and grind. The skill set wasn't, let's say, there was a lot of skilled guys. It was more heavy-duty journeymen, heavyweights that put on a good show, but the heat was more of their psychology instead of what they did actually physically in the ring. So that was probably the biggest thing I've noticed. And then when I got to Tomko's, of course you saw a good mix there. There was a lot of young talent and then a lot of veterans, sheep herders, Kaniski, who Roy mentioned. And then when we went to Stampede, that's when it just blew apart because that's where I was introduced to mid-heavyweights. And that was a whole new atmosphere for me.
Yeah, that was a big time in pro wrestling with Dynamite kind of leading the way in the late 70s, early 80s. Who was your favorite mid-heavyweight?
Myself, Gamma Singh.
Interesting
Big
pick.
Gamma Singh fan.
Interesting pick. What was it about Gamma that drew you to him?
Well, I've always kind of leaned towards the heels. I liked how they riled everybody up more. The skill set on Gamma, I think pound for pound, he could have went with anybody. And when given the chance, he showed that. And that's why he was Commonwealth champion, world mid-heavyweight champion. They put a little bit of trust in him. And a lot of the junior guys that he faced, they were all the young stages, Owen, Benoit, Dynamite, Davey. They all had a good guy to work with there.
So, Roy, when you first got back into Stampede Wrestling, early 1980s, 82, that must have been the time of the big Stampede shows where we had big stars coming in, like Nick Bockwinkel. Do you have some good memories of some of those matchups in Calgary?
Yeah, that Bockwinkel is, as Dwayne probably attests, he's one of my favorite world champions of all time. His interviews are amazing, showed class, and he would travel around the world. You know, they had NWA would travel around the world. WWF, they were just in the Northeast. So I didn't really ever classify them as a world champion myself. But when Bockwinkel came to town, that was actually like my second show to see him against Brett, which was a great card because that was the introduction of Bad News Allen. And he was against Jerry Morrow, and completely, they put Bad News over like nobody else's business on that card. And it's perfect because the pavilion was packed with, I think they held about 1,500 people in there. So it was packed because he beat the crap out of Morrow, beat up Wayne Hart, then Brett came in, and he beat up Brett, which set up for the main event, where Brett would lose that match because of blood loss to Nick Bockwinkel. And that's when Schultz actually jumps in and tries to help out Brett to set up his little bit of a feud also with Bockwinkel. But I also saw Butch Moffat in the crowd, and I remember him throwing a guy against the wall because this guy threw some crap in the ring. And Butch grabbed this guy and tossed him into the wall. And I always remember that because I'm just a small kid, and I'm just like, holy shit, that's one big dude. I ain't going to piss him off. And it turned out to be Butch Moffat. So I'd only happened to see Bockwinkel one time, though, which I regret. I wish I would have won more. But, you know, what can you do? When you're a kid, you can't drive. So we didn't really have LRT at that time. So we had just to take the bus or whatever. But, yeah, the Stampede shows were the best. I liked the Stampede week there. They brought in all the big hitters for one or two weeks there. And I know Dwayne would love to have seen like a Harley race in town for that.
For
the
sure.
The only time I saw Harley was at a WWF show, and that was late in his career there. So, but yeah, I mean, also on that one card was Dynamite dropping the belt to Davey, which was huge because I think Dynamite at the time was going to Japan. I'm not 100% sure. So he said he was dropping the belt to Davey, and they didn't keep the belt on Davey long. I noticed that the big thing for Stu was to keep the mid-heavyweight titles, or at least the world mid-heavyweight title, on the heels longer. Drew, I think, way more heat. It was better to have somebody a face chasing than a face defending, it seemed like, right? Like that old Ricky Steamboat out of. He was great as a champion, but he was way better as a challenger chasing for the belt. That's what I kind of compare it to, right? So, and as Dwayne said, the mid-heavyweights were by far my favorites. It's really what got me hooked a lot when I was younger.
It's an important adage in wrestling, isn't it, that the face should be chasing the heel as a champion. Those make for the best times, the best long-term storylines, and that was a good example of it. It's funny you bring up the Bret Hart Nick Bockwinkel. That was the first match I ever saw on TV, and so that was the match that drew me to it. I remember Bret was bandaged around his head at the time, right? Yeah. Do you recall that?
Yeah, because Morrow had actually bled, and Jerry Morrow never bled. So this is where you put over Allen within, maybe 5 minutes. Put him over to, like, the biggest heel in the territory. Then, of course, he beats up Wayne Hart, the ref. So his brother has to come in, beats him up, and he's bleeding too. And of course, Brett comes in. And someone post I read somewhere that they never explained why Brett had the bandage on his head. Maybe that was you, Corey, saying that. And that was from Bad News cutting him open and causing him to lose the world title, or a shot at the world title, basically. So it's a great angle, personally. What a way to put over a guy, and then have him just, which they don't seem to do much more anymore, is just go for about 3-4 week run of beating up everybody. Put him as a super heel, right? Now it's like they'll put a guy over for a week and then they'll lose. It just doesn't make sense to me. Territories are a way different world than they were compared to now.
And Stu is so good at that. He'd bring in a big heel, build him up over several weeks, then have him go after the belt. It was kind of a recipe for him for a long time. Yeah,
and I think that's how you build it, don't you? You got to draw houses, and the heels are what bring people in. Honestly, I think. I don't think the baby faces were, unless they're Hogan, but that's a total different idea, right? But I think the heels are what draw it in, because you want to see them lose. That's the bottom line. You want to see Brett win. That's why even when they were matching Dynamite against Bad News, I thought, what a weird mismatch, but Dynamite was so fast and good at what he was doing. Bad News would sell for him in a heartbeat, right? You could tell he would sell. I think he sold for him more than he did for Brett by far. You know, you don't want to drop the belt to a mid heavyweight, but if he's that over, you guys are drawing that much money. Why would you care?
So Dwayne, you were in Medicine Hat for a lot of the time that Stampede Wrestling was running through. Stampede was unique in that we actually had title changes occur outside of the main base of Calgary. A lot of territories didn't do that, but we saw title changes take place in Edmonton, Medicine Hat, Saskatoon. Unfortunately, not many in Regina, where I was living. Can you tell us about some of the stuff that you saw in Medicine Hat for title changes for Stampede Wrestling?
First two that come to mind was instantaneously Owen beating Maka Singh for the title here in town. That guy was over like gangbusters here in Medicine Hat. As soon as Eye of the Tiger hit, Cypress Center just roared. Maka Singh was by far the most hated person I've ever seen walk into Medicine Hat. Literally, they were waiting for him outside the door, ready to string him up. And there in January '87, he won the belt, and it was pretty cool to see. He was on the verge of becoming superstar, and my personal favorite time frame of Owen is '87, '89, when he was traveling around doing Stampede, Mexico, New Japan. He was showing skills there that, it was very rare. Dynamite and those guys had it, but he was bringing it more to the North American fans, and Meltzer helped put him over, so he started getting some more bookings around North America, and people started taking notice. '88 was probably the best Stampede show I ever saw. December, it's when the Bulldogs and Don Morocco hit town, and that was a big deal. Here, I'm sure Calgary was a pretty big deal, because, in the eyes of the fans, they were superstars. And to see some big WWE guys come back to town and the Bulldogs coming back to where they started, it was pretty cool to see. Morocco fought Maka Singh for the title here, North American title. And we had, honestly, I was trying to figure out the other day, because I was at the actual venue there 2 weeks ago, and the seating was 1,900. I think we had 1,800 in the building. And the place was as loud as I've ever seen for a sporting event per capita for that size. And when Morocco rolled him up for the pin, it was like deafening. It was unbelievable. And I didn't think he'd be that over here. I knew he was popular, but it was almost a testament for Maka Singh for being how hated he was. It was like people didn't care who was going to beat him. He just wanted to see him beat. And when Morocco did it, it was pretty cool. So the other interesting part about the North American title, there's been a lot of controversy over when that title actually changed hands. Some people are saying it changed hands in Edmonton. Some people are changed hands in Saskatoon, Regina. Well, it was here in Medicine Hat. It was filmed in Medicine Hat. Yet there's still people saying, no, it changed in Edmonton. And it did not change in Edmonton. I witnessed it live. And whether it was a dusty finish up in Edmonton and later on, someone didn't pay attention to what was going on. He didn't win it in Edmonton. He won it here. So that's one being kind of a thorn in my foot for a long time about that situation. And I talked to Roy about it a few times. History gets twisted a lot. There's a lot of people that there are so-called historians and twist things around and to suit their needs. And Roy is one of the few guys right now that's doing a lot of research into the out-of-town things. And as he can attest to, there's a lot of differences in what was known and what has actually happened. And it's cool that someone is actually putting a little bit of effort into recording that history.
That's great. Roy, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing? I know you're keeping some historical records about Stampede, trying to go back more in time. Can you fill us in a little bit about that?
Sure. I've been wanting to do it for a while. It's just like, okay, just get off your ass and do it. So what I'm doing is I'm Googling newspapers and finding clippings of the promoting of the matches and what have you. And then I go and use Vance Nevada's, who I find by far the best results around. And also I'll try to find clippings of sometimes a week later. Like I'm doing a lot. I'll do Regina, Edmonton, and Calgary. I'll find the odd ones here and there for other towns, but they'll actually, most of the time the newspapers are pretty accurate with their results, and I'll go by them sometimes too. So I try to compare the results, and I'm just building a binder year by year. Every year takes about 55 to 60 double pages of me putting down the clippings, cutting them out, putting them in order with the results of the card. So it's honestly takes me probably about 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks to do a month. So far I've just done only a couple of years, and that's actually taken me almost 2 months just to do that. I'm just trying to do accuracy, and I read again on Facebook, I read one fellow said it'd be nice if people would keep some of the history alive. I'm just trying to do it. Who gets the binders in the end? I have an idea, but now you can pass it on to their kids. Looking at you, fella. And they can keep that alive, because if I do, when I'm done with it, I want it to go to somebody that really would take care of it and try to pass it on somehow in their way too.
Would you ever consider putting it together into a form of an encyclopedia of Stampede Wrestling, for example?
Yeah, it'd be a lot. I mean, you could go volume by volume per year, I guess, right? And a lot of them, I don't know the results, so I just put the matchups that were listed in the paper. At least it's there. I mean, there's that one site, Cage Match. I think it's based out of Germany, actually. And they just copy and paste, like the way we were talking about that. A result, and if there is no result, they want to put even a listing of the card down, which I find wrong, because you got to keep something alive, so people do know what happened. There was an event that week, and if there wasn't, it was because of Christmas holidays, or they just there's a couple times during Stampede week they would actually skip a week here in Calgary, but they would be traveling outside of the province, or within the province, everywhere else, those small towns. Manton or where have you, Lethbridge, what have you. So doing volumes of that would be interesting. It'd take a lot of work, but it's not for money for me. It's just for the love of it. That's all.
It's interesting you bring up Cage Match. Cage Match goes back so far in time for Stampede. It goes into Wildcat, into big time wrestling, back into the 50s. And I often wonder, where did those results come from? Who entered those results into Cage Match?
I know Vance did. Vance went way back. And there's a friend of mine, I cannot for the life of me remember his name. He's in the Pacific Northwest, and I actually ran into him at Cauliflower Alley back in 2004. He actually came up to me because when I used to do my newsletter, yeah, I had one too. I used to trade with him for his, and he did Ring Around the Northwest, but he had such an extensive coverage of U.S. and Canada going back to the 20s and 30s for results. And I don't know what he's done with it, but he used to sell them for about $10 a year, and it was pages upon pages of results. And he worked his butt off to get those too, and it was a lifelong project for him. I can't remember his name offhand right now, so it's unfortunate, because I'd love to give him credit, because he's honestly truly one of the best historians I've ever met. And meeting him live was amazing, because his knowledge is fantastic.
One of the things about Stampede Wrestling is we know a lot of that footage exists. We know there's Calgary footage going back into the 60s. It's all being kept somewhere. Apparently Bret Hart held it up from being released to WWE Network. Have you ever thought about reaching out to Brett to see whether or not any of that footage could ever be released to try to get the records a little bit more in terms of the 60s, 70s?
I never even thought about that. I know that all the brothers were involved, I believe, in the sale too. McMahon with the tapes, because I know Ross had, from what I understood, had that, like at the Curry Barracks here in Calgary, they had a room there and they had all the reels set up, big ass reels apparently. So, and it's a lot of money just to convert those into DVD or VHS at the time, what have you. But no, I haven't reached out for them guys for that yet. Maybe that's a thought. I never really thought about doing that, to tell you the truth, because everybody knows that I love to have my Stampede footage, that's for sure. So, I don't mind sharing it, that's for sure too. But it's a project. There's a fellow named David Bixenspan. I don't know if you guys know of him. He's on Twitter. He's pretty big. He actually reached out to the Watts family back in probably about 15 years ago and found footage from his ex-wife and bought it off of her and had to convert it all. And he said it cost him at that time in the thousands, which was fine, but it was for a love for him too. I don't think he ever quite made his money back on it when he was trying to sell it, because people just trade it and move on, right? But I think it'd be a costly project, but it would be nice to try. I just don't think Brett has any footage. I think he has his copyright of his name, but not footage in its per se itself.
It's interesting for two reasons. Number one, we know those reel-to-reel footages are going to break down more over time. The film's going to decompose. So it'd be good to be able to translate it to a more meaningful media nowadays. The second thing is the monetary value of those is probably going to diminish over time as old fans die off, and then there's a whole group of new fans that really don't care about that time and generation. It would be nice if somebody could actually start to get that footage available, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you should be the man, Corey. I mean, you've got a lot of collection that I've seen that you've been sharing and stuff, and I don't know who you could reach out to. There's got to be stuff from Vancouver too, because I've never ever seen, except for the Japanese when they used to come down and film, for Vancouver footage, and they started doing shows in, I think, Dwayne, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe mid '83, like June or May of '83 when they started doing Vancouver, Victoria. So there's got to be footage out there of that, and I don't know who would have it. I've tried the old Tune 7 station years ago, and they said they didn't keep any of that stuff. So, and I know you, Dwayne, had said when we talked about this years ago too, that he tried the Medicine Hat station, and they didn't have anything at that time either. So,
built somewhere.
Yeah, unless it's been thrown out, which makes me cry, or just taped over. And I try to reach out to whoever I can. Sometimes, like I'll talk to Vern Siebert every now and then still, and I know he had that one Medicine Hat show, which was pretty cool, from that Channel 10 that you used to tell me about. And that was really neat to see that footage, too. I just love watching, especially out of town footage. It's just the most fantastic thing.
So, Dwayne, coming at it from Medicine Hat, I know your attendance there was typically up to 1,000 or so. In Regina, we had anywhere from 150 fans to close to 1,000 fans, depending on the night. What was it like in Medicine Hat for the average attendance? Did it fluctuate? Did you notice certain wrestlers would draw more than others?
Winter months, it was great. Didn't matter who was on the card, to be honest with you. We were 600 to 1,000 easy. Summer months, I don't know if it was because there was a lot happening out of town and people were just going camping and just happy to be outside. But the summer shows didn't do overly well. And they didn't run as much. Stu ran more shows October to April than, like I said, some months there were 2 shows. And Christmas time was always a big hit. Sometimes he'd come December 1st of the month, and then he'd be here for near to New Year's and always have the big Christmas Battle Royal. And it just, the attendance was sparser in the summer months. But like I said, winter months, anywhere I've seen a couple sellouts. 1,800, but that was when there was something really, really big. Owen Hart and Ron Starr had a sellout here. They were having, Ron was on the verge of turning good, so to speak, and he came here to challenge Owen for, I can't remember if it was Commonwealth or the North American title, but I think Owen was actually champ of both divisions at that point. And then Myers and Brown, bringing those guys back up again, they came and interfered in the match. And cost Ron the match. And then actually, Roy and I talked about this a couple months back. Starr would put on such a good show after the whole event was over. He was in the dressing room screaming. He was out in the parking lot screaming at Myers and Brown, what the F did you do this for? You know, and the fans were like, holy crap, this guy's really pissed. And then the next show coming through, we had was Owen and Ron versus the Masters of Disaster, and it was like packed to the house. The fans were like, holy crap, these guys, this is going to be interesting. And sure enough, it was good. Short-lived. Ron went back to the dark side again, but it was fun to watch.
That's a great way to sell the next show, isn't it? You have something that looks like it could be just more than just a show. It's actually looking more real, if you want to say it that way. And then the fans want to come out and see it the next time. It's a honorable way to do it.
Yeah. It can't beat the old ways that way because it actually worked. It was proven commodity back time and time again. You want someone to come in, you make them want to come. You don't just say, okay, well, next week we're back again. Well, you got to give them a reason to come.
Now, both of you guys, of course, were following Stampede during the eventual demise in the late '89. I can't tell you the amount of sorrow that I felt knowing that I wouldn't be able to see it. I was actually moving to Calgary at the time, hoping I'd be able to see it more regularly. But, of course, that fell through. What were the thoughts of when you found out that Stampede was going to be dying, replaced by, I guess, WWE programming for the most part, maybe some CNWA for a little while? What did you think about that, Roy? How are you feeling at the time?
For the '89 one? I remember flipping on the TV and then CNWA was on from Winnipeg. And I was going, okay, what the fuck is this? Honestly, I didn't have a clue. I was like, all right, well, there's Baron Von Raschke and Bob Brown and stuff like that. And then I had grabbed the newspaper later on that day, the Calgary Sun, and they announced that Stu was folding it again, or the Hart Boys were folding it again. And that was pretty choked because I just got back from Banff maybe a month before, so we'd only been able to see one show every year in Banff. They wouldn't come out to Banff too often. So I was like, of course, the first week I come back here, I come to town to see a street fight between another favorite of Dwayne's, Lethal Larry Cameron, against Davey Boy Smith. And I thought, okay, and the crowd seemed decent. Like, I mean, it was half full, so you had probably about 800 people to 900 people in there. So I'm thinking, okay, they can't be doing too bad. But and then a couple weeks later, they shut shop. So I was a little choked. I was about as upset as when they did that back in late '84. There was it '84 when they closed down. And all of a sudden, you turn on the TV and it's WWF, Maple Leaf Wrestling, and I was going, huh? Whoa, what's this? Why? I mean, it was cool to see because you read about all the guys in the news in the magazines, but I'm going, yeah, these guys are facing just scrubs left and right. You know what I mean? So that's not fun. You know, every match should be somewhat competitive. That's what you kind of grew up in the territories, right? You'd have your starter matches, but they were still somewhat competitive always to start off. So, yeah, it was a little disappointing, definitely.
Did you attend any of the matches in late '85 when it was making its reboot?
The 2 weeks that they did? No. I remember it actually got promoted a bit, so I knew about it. And I watched the show the very next day, the one with Sweet Daddy Siki, and then Bad News actually came in for the first show. He was in there. I think he was tagged up with Sweet Daddy against Leo Burke, and maybe it was Don Gagne, which is kind of a weird pairing because those two were always feuding in Stampede, the original Stampede. And then the next week they had their chain match with Leo and I think Kerry Brown. And then he just folded because the promoters wouldn't pay the guys, which is unfortunate. But plus you also had Ken Newman, who was the announcer who got in that argument with Killer Carl Krupp on the first one. And I remember that vividly. And Ken Newman's hated wrestling. Like, why would you even bring a guy on there who hated wrestling? Because he used to have a half-hour talk show back in the mid and late 80s. Mid and early 80s. It was like a 30-minute show, and he had Archie the Stomper Goldie on there. And I'll never forget it because he's sitting there crapping on wrestling the whole time. And then Archie just out and said, at least I'm not scared to take off my clothes in front of my wife. And I remember pissing myself off. And it was like one of the best responses you could ever hear. And he just shut him down. It was like, yeah, it's great, right? And then you bring this guy on to promote your wrestling show. Like, come on. That's like bringing like Jim Davies onto your show. Oops. Yeah. A guy that's, you know, somebody that should never have been on the show. Bring somebody who's believable, who loves what they're doing. I was never a huge Ed Whalen fan, But you know what? He added to the show. He was a character, and he knew that, right? And he would make it. You want this babyface to win. You want this to happen, right? And he was so disgusted with the heels, and that's what you want.
So in late 84, early 85, WWF tried to move in and take over the territory, of course. They were running shows in Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver. Did you ever attend any of those shows just to see what the fan reaction would be like?
For the WWF?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to the first 3 shows. The first show, it was different. It had a decent crowd, but it was in the corral. Well, sorry. It was in the Saddle Dome, and that's when Andre was here. So Andre came in, so I really wanted to see Andre. All right, and they were against the Samoans, and all Ash Sika did was smile and laugh throughout and just be comical. And it was cool. It was neat to see Tito Santana against Valentine for the Intercontinental belt and stuff like that, because that, to them, the Intercontinental belt meant something. It was a stepping stone to the world title, and they made it that way. And then I went to another show, and they couldn't sell for squat. It was probably maybe about 2,000-3,000 people. And that's when I tried to get that prick Tony Atlas's autograph, and he wouldn't sign anything for anybody. That was really And then the third show was they were at the Corral. And, they'd have maybe about 2,000 people at the Corral. And that was the first time I'd seen blood at a WWF show when Angelo Mosca actually bladed himself against the Iron Sheik. It was supposed to be Sergeant Slaughter, but that's when Slaughter fell out of favor with the WWF and had left just prior to that tour. So Mosca had to fill all of his appointments going against the Iron Sheik and Volkov, wherever they were meeting up. So, and then I go to the sporadic ones every year or two when they would come to town, because I kind of really lost interest in the WWE product, or F product, at the time. I was watching on TV for free bonus, but, it just wasn't, it was almost like a B show coming through to Western Canada.
So Dwayne, how about you? During that time in 84, 85, and then after 89, how did you feel your wrestling void?
Well, 84, 85, I was actually big into Stampede, but I was also big into NWA. So I was getting a lot of tapes sent up, and I had a big fixation on that. WWF, I wasn't really overly big on. I watched the odd show that came through on TV. It had its main event and stuff later on. But the first WWF show that I remember in Medicine Hat actually was in '89. That's when the main event was Dusty Rhodes versus Ted DiBiase. So I actually went to that one because NWA, Dusty Rhodes was, he's Mr. NWA, and him coming over was pretty cool to see. So I went to see that, and they had it was pretty stacked card for Medicine Hat. They had Demolition there against Twin Towers, Rude against the Warrior. That was one of the other matches, and they had about 1,500 people. So even in Medicine Hat, I thought our arena could have fit about 3,500, and they didn't even sell there. So even at that point, people were still yelling out. I remember because people were yelling out Stampede Wrestling, and it was kind of like, "This is fake! This is fake! We want Stampede Wrestling!" And I'm like, that's odd. That's odd, but it shows you the level of respect that Stampede Wrestling had. Like, it still carried over. There was a lot of traditionalists that still wanted Stampede Wrestling. It's kind of like what Roy said too on TV. There was more squash matches on WWF, and I think the fans wanted to see every match meant something. And Stampede, even Cuban could work the opening, or he could work the main event, and so everybody was believable at that point. And you come there, that Rick Rude was going to defeat Steve Lombardi. So a lot of fans I didn't believe that. I didn't like that much, and that's why I kind of avoided the WWF for a long time. And probably main reason I watched is because of the Bulldogs and Heart Foundation. That's probably the only reason I really started to tune in more often than not, and that's the Stampede connection.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always had a much more appeal to NWA as well. The only WWF I ever watched really was Tito Santana, Greg Van Talent, and then Savage, and then Heart Foundation, Bulldogs. Otherwise, it wasn't appealing to me for that same reason. You'd watch a whole hour show and there wasn't one angle being portrayed. So, Dwayne, I know you're a big NWA fan. I think in particular you're a big fan of the Koloffs. Can you tell us about how that developed?
I was always a fan of Ivan Koloff because when I lived back east, I had some friends back there that sent me tapes and stuff of, international wrestling, Ontario wrestling. And that's where Ivan basically got his start. So then when I came back out to Western Canada, I just traded. I traded Stampede tapes for NWA tapes because we didn't have, cable. TBS wasn't airing up here at that point. And I've always was a fan of Ivan. So then when Koloff debuted in '84 there, Nikita, it came pretty cool to watch that. And then I've always had an affection for heel foreign wrestlers like the Russians, the Cubans, that type of character, and I just loved how they riled up the crowd. But Nikita was turned out to be one of my favorites, and I actually got to meet him here about 4 years ago. He came through Medicine Hat with CWE, and he was following me on Twitter because I was always tagging him in posts of the pictures and the videos that he was in. And when I walked into the venue that night, he recognized me, stood up, shook my hand, and I've actually got a kind of a friendship with him going on now. We talk almost every 3-4 days together about something. And it turned out to be, not the big evil Russian that he portrayed. Pretty damn good guy.
Absolutely. So I want to ask both of you your favorite Stampede match and your favorite Stampede angle. Roy, how about you?
That I've seen live. Match. When Dynamite and Davey used to go against each other for the World Mid Heavyweight title, is fantastic. The favorite one is when I saw Davey winning the title on Stampede Week off Dynamite. That was just amazing. I mean, I was standing on my chair and I was told to sit down by people behind me, and I was, I'm like 4'1" at the time. Give me a break. So that was an amazing match, and I was such a huge Davey Boy Smith fan back then, by far. I just loved all the English wrestlers back then. I know Frank Collins, not English, is Scottish, but he was still one of my favorites too, is Robbie Stewart. He's an amazing worker. Favorite angle? Dynamite turning face. It started with him and Gamma, where Gamma cost the tag titles with Duke Myers and Dynamite. I think it was Leo and Brett. I could be wrong, but I think it was, which also turned into another angle down the road, by the way. But, and then all of a sudden they just started going at it because Dynamite didn't like it, and they matched up right away the next week. Then, because I saw them in a ladder match, which was never broadcast on TV because the tapes were actually stolen and was put in the Body Press magazine the following week. So they had to just do a rebroadcast. But I remember seeing Dynamite and Gamma in a ladder match. And nobody's seen ladder matches, really. They were not the norm by any means in '82, right? Late '82. So that was an amazing match. But I still think my favorite by far would be Dynamite, Davey, and the Dynamite Gamma feud. As you can tell, I'm kind of a Dynamite fan myself. So,
Dwayne, how about you?
Favorite matches that I've seen live, Bazarab and Owen Hart versus Viacom Express. Those guys tore the house down. I saw them, there was 1-2 week span that I saw them in Lethbridge, Tabor, Medicine Hat, and not a single match was identical. And those guys, four of them, just worked their butts off. And kind of like Roy said, standing on your feet, like, holy shit, what are these guys going to do next? This is unbelievable. Those guys were, I would have put those two teams against any team, and I was being a pro NWA guy, I would have put them against any team in the NWA at that point for working teams like Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express. They could have jumped in there and had a great match with those guys. And I say by far, I'm blessed. We've seen a lot of great guys come through those doors, and I'm sure, every year there was a match of the year that we could have seen. But those two teams had matches that stand out for me. And angle, it's hard to put through an angle that surpasses another one, but the building of the Karachi Vice, to me it wasn't one specific little detail, but it was just the birth of them and how they grew. And then, some guys are in, some guys are out, and it was just watching that interaction and how much heat they could get, and it didn't matter what city they were in Edmonton, Calgary. It's just they had the right combination of characters there that just pissed everybody off, and it was awesome to see.
I got a question for you, Dwayne. Now, when did Abu Weasel join the Karachi Vice? Do you know roughly at that time frame? Because I remember the Karachi Vice consisting of Kerry Brown, obviously Gamma Maka, Steve DeSalvo, which was hilarious to see. But I cannot remember when Abu Weasel joined that group.
I think it was just prior to the Commandos being formed. That's what I remember. I don't remember. I remember him being there with Maka and Gamma, and then all of a sudden he's with the Cubans, and then they started to have a little bit of a fallout. Do you remember when the Singh boys used to fight the Cubans? Yeah.
It was they kind of did that conflict, but KY Wakamatsu, funny rib by Bruce, that name, against John Foley, where they have the two armies. And they also did that with Rosenblum and Foley too, right? They'd always seem to want to do that angle. I think that's just too much chaos going on at once, but that's just me. That makes sense though, because I was thinking 87-ish, 88.
Yeah, 87, early 88. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just curious if you can remember that, because he was a big part of the Karachi Vice.
Can you imagine if merchandise was a big thing in the mid-'80s? Can you imagine how many Karachi Vice shirts would have sold at that time?
It would have been great, because I want one still to this day. And
I can't believe Raj Gamble Stunt doesn't sell them in Calgary, because I'm sure there's enough fans that we've been buying them up.
Absolutely, right? That would make sense.
When you think about today, how merchandise is a huge part of what wrestlers are making for their income, it's just amazing that it never took place at that time. A simple T-shirt costs a couple bucks to make, and you can sell it for $15, $20. A big profit for wrestlers.
Absolutely, and their big thing was the promo pictures. Because I remember I've still got my Davey Boy picture, my Dynamite, Leo and Schultz, and all those autographed by him too, which was nice. But I mean, those were the promo pictures, and I sold them for $1 or $2 a pop each time too. The color ones were $2, and black and whites are $1. And that's so cheap, you know. They could have made a killing off of this if they were thinking ahead, which I'm surprised they didn't.
So I got a question for both of you, and there's no right answer to this, but why do you think at the end of 1989, Stu did not pass on his promotion to somebody else? Obviously, at the time, Bruce Hart was the one that was being more of a booker at the time. Why do you think Stu just let the promotion just die and not continue?
I don't know. That's tough to say. Maybe because he didn't want to leave those little rat bastards with much to do that he gave to them. They got to earn it themselves. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But I don't know. I'm not sure. I really don't know the politics involved in that family for that stuff. I know Bruce, probably, honestly, I think he'd be the best to answer, because I know he tried, honestly, and I give Bruce kudos for that, because he was actually a fantastic booker. He came up with some of the most bizarre angles ever, and it was great. And it was original, like the Zodiac and Jason. That was a fantastic angle. Like, that was just a great character and weird little things to go on. It was great. I just don't know if Stu had enough and the boys had enough, but I heard Bruce had tried to start up a smaller promotion a year or two later, and if you don't have TV, you're really not that successful. Not with the indies back then, I don't think. So it's word of mouth, right?
Dwayne, how about you? Any theories?
Well, I heard it off and on. Bad News told me one thing once. He said the Stampede board, like, and I'm talking about the Pavilion, Saddle Dome and stuff, they didn't want to carry on no further. So they were like, we're not going to allow back in here. So going to another venue without TV would have been really tough, because word of mouth is basically what your advertising would have been. And news actually said there was a lot of people against it. And of course, when CNWA went to Silver Dollar Action Center, of course that guy owned the building, so he didn't have that cost overhead that anybody else would have had to bring in. So who's Stu going to pass it on to? I'm sure the Harts, at that point, Brett was probably the richest in the family. and it's still going to cost a lot of money to rent the venue and stuff and not be guaranteed, right? So I think that played a little bit of factor, and it was money.
So we're in a different time now, of course. We're at a time when media is king. People don't go to live events as much anymore. But I'm watching some new territories forming. There's SWE in Texas. There's World Class that's forming among the American Southwest. Florida is starting up as a kind of territorial promotion. Do you guys think that a territory of wrestling can make a go in this day and age?
Well, if those guys are in charge, put their egos in check, yes, that's the big thing. Because here in Alberta, of course, we got, like right now, for example, there's like 4 or 5 different indie promotions going on. And there's 1 or 2 that are really well established and a couple that are just, here and there, pop up a show here and there. And then there's another show, a promotion that comes in from Manitoba. And potentially you could make it work if the promoters would allow, you can help cut back costs. Let's share rings instead of having to transport a ring around from Lethbridge to Edmonton. Let's let the Lethbridge promotion work there. So we'll have some of your talent work there, some of the talent work in Edmonton. But then you get the old archaic attitude that, my Edmonton boys can't work Lethbridge. The boys in Calgary, no way in hell they're working Medicine Hat, because they're hurting my promotion. And if they can get past that stage where they can just drop this, we all know what it is. Let's allow the promoters to work together, give the fans what they want. If you're going to restrict a couple workers that are Alberta based and say, they can't work RCW in Calgary because they're a PWA, or an RCW guy can't work for Pure Power in Lethbridge, that won't work. It'll just limit the ties, and then cost money. Once again, it all goes back to money. And if you can help the promoters kind of save a little coin, then I think it can work. And TV, if we can get some media to jump on board, and there's lots of community stations. There's lots of that out there. Use YouTube. If they can start getting some programs going and actually have somebody that can throw a camera out there to tape this show instead of just have the show and then we made our 50 fans. Well, why don't you just increase that 50 fans and get 200? I know CWE's been coming to town here. When they first came about 4 years ago, they only had like 40 some people in the audience, and now they're bringing in about anywhere from 200 to 300 a show. And it can work. Territory can work because they work Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC prior to COVID, Manitoba. So that's kind of a territorial thing in itself.
So Roy, one last question. One of the best angles, I think, in Stampede Wrestling was also controversial. It was with Bad News, Stomper Goldie, his supposed son in Calgary, and of course the big brawl that ensued and led to them having to get kicked out of the pavilion, going outside of the city borders to actually film their shows. Were you there for that? Were you there for any of the shows around that? Did you get a sense of what was happening in the promotion? Was that the initial downfall that led to Stu shutting up in 1984?
I wasn't there for that show. My sister went. I couldn't make it that night, which sucks. I still have the program, but and by the way, it was KY Wakamatsu, or was it Was it Wakamatsu and Brown and Bad News that tied them up? Exactly. Sorry, it was just a debate we had a few weeks back. Yeah, I thought it was a great angle. It was unfortunate you got Ed flying off the handle like he always did. And the Calgary Boxing and Wrestling Commission, seriously. They destroyed it, personally. Because it was a hot angle, but they were still able to carry on other territory, other cities. And I understand they drew well in Edmonton and let's say Medhat, Regina, Saskatoon, wherever else they were hitting. They just didn't hit the Calgary market, and they said, well, we lost on the Calgary market, but they would go out to, what was this, the Susina reservation there. It's not that far away, really. Just outside the Calgary limits. But they would bus people. If they want to show up at the pavilion, they would actually bus them to the arena. And they'd done that before. So was it that lead to the demise? I don't think so. I mean, when I was at the loser leave town match between Killer Khan and Archie Goldie, and that was in January, it was a pretty full house. from what I can remember. I still got pictures of that too. But it was a really full house. I don't know if that would have been it. I think it was, honestly, is that I think that the cost, again, it's all about money, right? I know the Stampede board is ridiculous in what they charge for people, like companies to come in and stuff like that. And I know the pavilion probably cost, oh man, maybe even half of what they would make in a gate just for the night. I wouldn't be surprised. That's how greedy they are at the Stampede, Calgary Stampede board. So when you got nowhere else to go and everybody's been going to the pavilion for, like Dwayne was saying, for all these years, how do you change over to another arena? And it was convenient because they would have the LRT at that time and stuff like that downtown. So people could get access to it. So I don't think that angle really killed Calgary. I remember how hot it was. It was in the newspapers, magazines, on TV, like on news channels. They would have debates about it and everything. I personally, I don't think that's what killed Calgary or Stampede for that time. I just think it was a money thing. They weren't getting very big attendance at the end there because they had people flip-flopping throughout the territory in the summer months. That's when they folded too, right? And it was Vince McMahon bullshit.
Yeah. Corey, I got a question for you. Being in Regina, what was the hottest angle type thing that happened in Regina that Roy and I wouldn't have known about here in Alberta? Like, because sometimes there were Regina was always a hot spot from what I saw results news-wise, but we still weren't there. What was the biggest thing that went over there?
There wasn't one angle in Regina that was what I would call over. I think the biggest thing that was over there was Muck and Sing and Gamma Sing. They were hated. They drew money. People wanted to come out just to see Karachi Vice and see them wrestle against whether it was Ben Bazarab or the Hearts or Pillman. They just wanted to see Karachi Vice. That was the number one thing in Regina at all times.
So pretty much standard across the board?
I think so. That was probably the case all throughout Western Canada, my guess is. Karachi Vice left a lasting impression upon many wrestling fans, of course.
Yeah, so the Karachi Vice were kind of like our Four Horsemen for the NWA, where they were just, people wanted to see them lose, right? And isn't that what you're supposed to do? The faces are supposed to win 80% of the matches, right? The heels are supposed to lose all the time, and that is what you want to see, right? And then they just win that one match, and it pisses everybody off. And that's how it just keeps rolling and rolling.
I guess the biggest angle I can recall involving the Karachi Vice is they beat Chris Benoit to a pulp. He was bleeding, and then later in the card, about an hour later, he came out and interfered in one of the Karachi Vice's matches, and I can't remember who it was exactly, but he came out bandaged a la Bret Hart and Nick Bockwinkel, and then the crowd went crazy, of course, because he was getting his revenge from Karachi Vice. That was a great angle. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming out on your Sunday. I really appreciate it. Having some old-time memories about Stampede Wrestling is great. Hopefully we can have you on again in the future sometime next year.
Anytime.
Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot, Roy. Thanks a lot, Dwayne.
In the meantime, and in between time, that's it. Another edition of Stampede Wrestling. Bye-bye now.